So we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into AI now. So if we could just get the slides ready at the back, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, can I have the screen? Thank you very much, guys. Sorry, give me a second here. Great. Okay. So we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive into AI now because it's such a hot topic at the moment. And we can kind of trace this current explosion of AI really back to around the middle of the last decade when we saw breakthroughs in machine learning. And that really started to propel the idea of artificial intelligence into the mainstream. Jonathan sort of referred to this earlier on, but around that time we saw some really astonishing advances in the compute power behind AI, and that was combined with availability of data through the internet, which led to multiple breakthroughs in areas of computer vision, of natural language understanding, pattern recognition, and complex problem solving. And this kind of fueled the excitement around the potential of AI, which was stoked by all of the technology companies, but also by the mainstream media, who reported on wave after wave of breakthroughs that indicated that AI had finally come of age and was really ready to transform society. Now, this image of artificial intelligence is really quite tantalizing. To me, it always conjures up images of these highly intelligent machines that can think for themselves and, with these human-like capabilities, it can almost serve as our digital servants, easing our way through daily life. I remember back in 2015, I was lucky enough to go on a trip over to Silicon Valley around that time, and it was just a couple of weeks after Tesla first announced the launch of their autopilot program, which is their self-driving car program. And if you had a Tesla at that time, you could simply just download that software and off your car went. It could start driving itself. And I remember driving down the freeway in Silicon Valley, looking out the window, and there was a guy being driven to work in his Tesla while he was sat there on his smartphone, reading the news or doing his email. And I just thought, wow, this is it. Great, the future's arrived. This is amazing. I'm in Silicon Valley, self-driving cars, absolutely brilliant. I came back from that trip so full of optimism about what AI could achieve, thinking that my kids wouldn't have to learn how to drive, wondering how long it would be before I could summon the car to pick me up from the pub after having a few drinks. It was amazing. Just before that as well, Amazon launched the first of their Alexa devices. Now, this was a really interesting idea because it first introduced the concept of a computer whose entire user interface was based on voice. If you think about it, up until that point, the way that we'd engage with computers was either using keyboards or mice or eventually touch screens. All of that fed back to us through a graphical user interface. But these devices were really clever because they were really just a very basic form of computer with all of the intelligence housed up in the cloud. It was simply a microphone and a set of speakers. And when you spoke to it, the speech was streamed straight up to the cloud, through the microphone. It worked out the response and it was played back to you through the speaker. Really clever. It acted a bit like a voice browser. And all of that happened in a split second as well. It's incredible how quickly all that processing worked and fed back to you the answer. And also, interestingly, this acted as a really ingenious way for Amazon to collect data. And they used that data to train up their machine learning algorithms to improve the performance of speech recognition. Now, when these devices were first launched, the ambition behind them was huge. It was almost, the idea was to become these Star Trek-style, all-seeing, all-knowing computers that could organize our lives and control our homes, give us access to the companies that we deal with. But really, certainly those initial waves failed to reach their full potential. Today, most people just use them to play music or maybe to control smart home features. The challenge was that understanding all of the complex relationships that we have with all of the different organizations that we deal with, utilities, insurance, travel, banking, and so on, was just too complicated. In some ways, it's a bit like calling your bank up to try and book a holiday. The person at the other end of the phone wouldn't have any idea how to deal with that request. They wouldn't have the context, and they wouldn't have the tools to be able to fulfill it. So I think, the initial idea behind these universal voice assistants that could become our, personal PAs was just a bit too ambitious. What emerged, though, from those early experiments were an incredible set of services that could recognize speech, that could understand and translate natural language and pick out intent to an incredibly high degree of accuracy. We're also nearing the point now where those same algorithms can synthesize speech to the point where it's almost indistinguishable from you or I speaking. It's incredible how amazing that sounds now. But perhaps, as Jonathan mentioned, the true breakthrough here was the democratization of these technologies. The fact that, cost reduces all the time whilst performance increases all the time, all of that delivered through the cloud. And what that now means is that we can embed natural language, speech recognition, synthetic speech into all kinds of different applications and services. But it turns out the most practical application of where to put that technology happens to be where millions of conversations take place every day, the contact center. Instead of creating this general AI that has to understand everything, we can create them that understand the domain that they operate in, whether that be insurance or travel or any other sector. We can train them to be experts in the field that they're deployed in. It also allows us to start thinking about voice as a digital channel and turning it into data. So the first wave of AI, the first wave of these conversational user interfaces was deployed, as we know, through voice bots and chat bots, which allowed customers to navigate their way through the digital world or get answers quickly to problems without the need to speak to a human. Often they replaced these clunky old touch-tone type of IVR systems or acted as a concierge for chat and messaging services. And for those organizations that deployed this technology, they saw huge gains in productivity, often automating 30 to 40% of interactions that would have once been handled by a human. We're now in the early stages, I would say, of the second wave of this technology, which takes those same natural language capabilities, but embeds them to support people in CRM applications or in mobile apps or field service applications. So we can now start to think of this technology a bit more like a coach. It's listening into conversations and it's stepping in to help out where needed with things like suggestive responses or useful knowledge articles, maybe compliance issues, next best actions, quality, all of those types of things. And we've done quite a few experiments with a few clients in this space, and those initial deployments have shown some real benefits to productivity as well as the experience of the advisor or the user of the CRM platform that's using it. So as AI becomes ever easier to deploy, as the cost continues to decrease, technology isn't the barrier that it once was. It doesn't matter whether you've got an old voice platform or the latest cloud technology. It doesn't matter whether you've got a clunky old mainframe or whether you're fully cloud native in terms of your data. You can still take advantage of AI automation and increasingly AI coaching anywhere in your organization. And it's the organizations that are embracing this future that are positioned to gain competitive advantage as this technology continues to mature. So, as I say, the barrier isn't about technology. The barrier now is about ambition. And the key to success is about execution. And on that thought, I'd love to welcome on stage Barry Webb, our next speaker today. Sabio and BGL have been working together for over a decade now on numerous different initiatives. They've won multiple awards as an organisation. And we just rolled out Twilio into their contact centre. And Barry's going to come up and talk about their digital voice programme, which uses Google's AI technology to transform customer engagement. So thank you very much. Big round of applause to Barry.
Thanks, Stu. Good morning, everyone. I'll just second Jonathan's comment. It's really quite nerve-wracking standing up in front of a room this large when you spent 2 years sitting in your broom cupboard looking at a screen. So, Stuart asked me to come along and talk to you about our experience. Like I said, my name's Barry Webb. I work for BGL Insurance. I'm responsible for contact centre and customer service technology strategy. For those of you that don't know BGL, we are a leading provider of affinity insurance services, working with some of the UK's top consumer brands and insurers. We serve about 3 million UK customers, providing motor, home and life insurance. And we started our journey using this AI technology about sometime in 2018. And that arose out of our recognition that despite having already created some really great online digital experiences, many of our customers still picked up the phone when they needed insurance support. And our research with customers showed us that that actually wasn't because customers didn't want to use digital service. It's kind of they forgot it was there. The insurance industry over a number of years had trained them to expect and believe that the only way to get service support was to phone a contact centre. And that actually worked not in their favour at times. So they were constrained by things like contact centre open hours. They were impacted by things like queue times during peak periods. So from that, we developed a hypothesis, and the hypothesis went along the lines of customers would be happy to use automated AI-backed services in the telephony channel, but as long as it helped them get their job done quickly, simply, and easily. So using that hypothesis, we set ourselves a really sort of ambitious goal of creating a broad range of capability that customers could use, not just for things like simple FAQs and queries, but to do much more complex changes to their insurance policies. And taking that goal, in 2018, we did some market research to identify the best technology capabilities and partners that could help us go out and test that concept. That led us to finding Twilio, Google, and the Sabio airline team. And working together, we put forward, created a live pilot that we put in front of customers, starting in January 2019, running through that first quarter. And we tested our concept with about 170,000 customers. And that showed us that our hypothesis was good. Customers were absolutely happy to engage with this new breed of technology, like I say, as long as it helped them move forward and made their life easier in getting their jobs done. So moving forward, like everyone, we were disrupted a little bit by the pandemic. It wasn't until January 2021 that we started to move that technology into a live deployment. And we're almost at the end of that initial deployment phase now, and we're moving forward to a sort of a persisted product management model. And when Stuart asked me to come along and share some experiences with you, reflecting back on that 3-4 years, there was probably 3 key things, or at least 3 themes of things that came to mind that I thought might be useful to share. The first of which is, what don't you know? And actually, just as importantly, you already know what you already know. And I can't claim this as my own. I've actually got Tom Mullen at Sabio to thank for this. He probably doesn't remember the conversation, but when we were talking to potential partners, I was quite keen to impress on them that we had some experience in this space. We spent many years working with the Sabio team on things like automation in IVR, and the reason I was trying to impress that on them wasn't to show off, but it was to say, look, we know what we're doing here. We know what the benchmark is. We know what you've got to exceed. And everyone else was happy to listen to that. Tom stopped me in my tracks and said, that's great, but if you know those things will work, don't worry about it. You can come back to that later. If you want to create new transformational services for your customers, focus on what you don't know. Test some new concepts, put some new things out in front of customers. And that was absolutely key, because I think otherwise there's the risk that we would have carried on and kind of optimised what we had in the past and just built a shinier version of things we'd done historically, not created genuinely new services. And the way we went about that was to continue to develop a series of hypotheses that we could test against. So we broke down our overall goal of creating some great automation services and tested little concepts at a time. So the very first one, probably really familiar to everyone now, is we put this technology in front of our existing telephony stack, just asked customers what they were calling about, asked them to engage with us in their own language, and as Stu mentioned, to use that to drive intent and understanding in terms of customers' reasons for contacting us. And then from there we moved on through a series of other hypotheses, some of which I'll talk about in a moment. And then really key to this, again, recognising that most of this is unknown. This is a new journey. Certainly it was a new journey for us, and there was much more that we didn't know than things we did know. So we recognised that there was no way we could build out a big plan. I think Jonathan mentioned sort of traditional ways of building out waterfall deliveries that might take months or even years of build before you put anything in front of customers. We absolutely wanted to avoid that. We wanted to be able to put things quickly in front of customers, adapt to what we learned, change our plan, and move forwards, but keeping that overall goal in sight. And the key approach that we use for that is to move in incremental steps. And the main tool or technique was the concept of MVP, or minimum viable product. And that was all for us around continue to build knowledge, but most importantly, mitigate risk. We knew that some of our hypotheses wouldn't succeed. We didn't know which ones they would be, but we knew they wouldn't all be successful. So using the MVP concept to minimise effort, build time, engineering effort before you put something in front of customers and learn from has been absolutely crucial. And one of the best examples we've got of that is one of our early concepts beyond the initial deployment was that some of the information that we need to share with customers can be really quite complex to describe over the telephone. So, you know, if a customer makes a change midway through an insurance policy, for example, we have to share relatively complex financial information with them. You know, what it means to their old premium, their new premium, their next instalment, et cetera, et cetera. And even with our best colleagues in the contact centre, that often needs to be repeated 2 or 3 times. So we developed the concept of sharing complex information visually whilst engaging with a customer in the telephony channel. And what we wanted to do was push some of that information out to customers via SMS and let them read it and respond to us in that interaction. Now, the automated build of that is relatively complex. So instead of actually building it, what we did was we had a bit of a Wizard of Oz MVP here, where from the customer's perspective, that journey appeared entirely automated, but actually we had our contact centre colleagues sitting in the background, receiving and sending SMSs, keying information into our back-end systems, and that enabled us to get that test in front of customers in days, or certainly just a week or 2 rather than months, and prove out that it was valuable to customers, and then we could come back around and engineer the complete automated solution later. Again, a theme that's we've touched on already today, data. Building on the concept that there's lots of stuff you don't know, we were really keen to avoid making decisions based on perceived knowledge. So being absolutely certain that we had the means to measure the success or otherwise of each of our steps was critical. But this comes with a big caveat from me, really, in that you could drown in the data that you derive from systems like this and from initiatives like this. So as important as MVP is for features in front of customers, I would suggest being really clear around the data you need to prove the success for each of your steps. Don't over-engineer it, and be really careful that you don't get distracted by something that looks interesting but leads you off down a rabbit hole. It doesn't take you in the direction you're trying to travel. And then the third element in this theme is around cadence. And by cadence, I mean the ability to put things out in front of customers really frequently. You know, lots of organisations, we work in 2-week sprints, and we aim to get a new customer feature out every sprint, sometimes several features a sprint. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is it continues to build knowledge, and let's say it proves that you've broken down your deliverables into manageable bite-sized chunks, so you're mitigating risk. But it also builds confidence in your team, your delivery team. They love being able to get features out quickly, and it builds great confidence in your organisation and your key stakeholders because they can see that continuous improvement. So, I think we've touched on this already. This isn't really about technology. The technology, I think the phrase was, is the enabler, but this is about people. And the fundamental group of people that I think you need to keep in mind is your customers, right? You're doing this for your customers to create new services and features for your customers. And critical is understanding what do your customers need from you. And obviously you know your customers far better than anyone else. But when you're talking about, particularly in a situation like this, conversational interfaces, it's really important to understand what is it that your customer's trying to do? Where are they when they're doing that? You know, what emotional state are they in? So whilst the technology could automate every scenario, there will be some that are either just really hard to do or just inappropriate. So if you've got a customer dealing with a really sensitive situation, perhaps a bereavement, you know, it's probably a scenario where you need real human empathy rather than technology. Similarly, some scenarios will involve lots of complex information that you could share in the spoken sense, as I've said, but actually it might make that really tricky. So design with your customers in mind and forget the technology. You know, we use a couple of techniques here, one of which is when we're designing conversational interfaces, we start with people. We have someone pretending to be the automated assistant, someone pretending to be the customer, and quite quickly you can work through and identify things that just won't work or things that need really careful thought to work properly. And we've got a bit of a design mantra there, and that's, you know, just because you can doesn't mean you should. The technology can do it, but you shouldn't necessarily build it. So the second fundamental group of people is your team. And again, I think this has been touched on already. You know, again, I won't apologise for saying it, the technology is capable, but it'll only work if you've got the ability to execute, if you've got the team that can carry that vision forward and turn that into reality. So things like, who knows best in your organisation how to manage conversations with your customers? They're probably the guys sitting in your contact centre, right? The contact centre colleagues know absolutely how to help a customer get from A to B. So they'll be fundamental in supporting your design. Similarly, in your tech teams, you'll have some people in those teams are busting down your door to get involved in an initiative like this, using some cool new technology. You need to really harness that enthusiasm and help that drive your initiative forward. But just as importantly, there'll also be some areas, some skills gaps, some knowledge gaps that you just don't have. And that's where guys like the team at Sabio can really help you accelerate both delivery and acquiring knowledge yourselves. And then thirdly, this really for me is about ongoing value. This absolutely isn't about delivering a project where you can get to an end date, disperse your team, wander off and leave something that's going to persist on its own. This is about changing the shape of your organisation, changing how you interact with customers. So I'd urge you to have absolutely front of mind that future state. How do you need to organise your business to drive future ongoing value? So just to recap, what are the 3 things that I think we've learned along the way? Focus on what you don't know, not what you already know. That way you'll be able to create new services and kind of break some new ground. Find a methodology that enables you to move with real pace and mitigate risk, lets you accumulate knowledge and continue to move forward. And fundamentally, this is about people, it's not about the tech. So thank you for listening. Hopefully something in there is of use to you, and I'll hand you back to Stu.